It's funny you say that because, and I just want to say this. I'm not fraudulently reporting anything to DoorDash, but
Hello and welcome to the Stockout, first Stockout of 2025 in the return season. I'm one of your hosts, Mike Baudendistel, joined by Grace, Sharkey. Grace, Happy New Year to you.
Happy New Year. Yeah, 25. It's crazy. Especially in this industry, we always hear about like goals for like 2030 and you're like that's a decades away and it's not so far anymore. So, yeah, excited for a new year and a new season with you, Mike.
Yeah, and it should be an exciting year in the freight industry. It's going to be, I think, a year of a lot of changes on the policy front. Hopefully, change in the freight market as well. So I think there's going to be a lot to talk about, lots to write about, a lot of data to analyze. Should be a good year, and lots of newsletters to sign up for. If we do have the new graphic up, that we sort of redid the newsletter sign up. Go to freightwaves.com, up at the top under newsletters, mouse over newsletters, and then we have your newsletter under the second one under trending now, Fraud Watch, among a number of others under trending now, and then mine is the second under Market Insights, the Stockout. Now that I'm thinking about this, maybe we should just put the hosts or the author's name right next to the newsletter. Sort of a great idea. That'll give FreightWaves for free here. So today on the Stockout, what we're going to be talking about is some of the new policy changes for Mexico, sort of the move to eliminate zone skipping, which seemed like that was coming, but maybe coming a little bit faster than we would have anticipated. Ocean rates are on the rise again, actually from a fairly high level already. We'll talk about that. Fraudulent returns, a growing problem. That's really in your area of expertise there. And then to the extent there's time, I can talk about intermodal volume, which has been strong, some of the other takeaways from FreightWaves newsletters, and those things. So it should be plenty to talk about. Encourage everyone, again, to go to freightwaves.com, sign up for any of the newsletters, including the Stockout newsletter. And so with that, we'll get into the first story today is Mexico moves to stop zone skipping. This was an article that Craig Fuller posted. He also posted a link to a really good X tweet that sort of walked through it a little bit. And basically what happened here is the Mexican president signed an act into law that immediately raised tariffs on apparel and other goods from China. This whole concept of Chinese goods coming into Mexico as a way to circumvent U.S. tariffs, then breaking up the shipments into smaller packages that are less than $800 to sort of qualify for the de minimis exemption, which includes a lot of these e-commerce companies, companies like Shein and
Shein and
Temu.
Temu.
Okay.
There we go.
Okay.
Yeah, switch it up. Love that.
Yeah, I'm not a frequenter of those sites, so I can screw that up. So what they're doing is raising tariffs in some cases from 20 to 25%, up to 35%. In other cases, taking them from 10 to 15. So it should eliminate some of the zone skipping for textiles and apparels. Actually, I have an interesting sonar chart on this where we look at from a third party company that looks at shipment volume just from China to the U.S. and just from China to Mexico, and you sort of put those on a relative basis. Of course, U.S. much larger consumption market, but if you do just as percent changes, what you've seen is since about the end of 2020, the volume from China to Mexico up about 40%, the volume from China to the U.S. down about 26%. What that doesn't show is that there's been a lot of volume growth from Southeast Asia to the U.S., countries like Vietnam. So China steadily has lost market share to the U.S., but a big part of that seems to be, by all accounts, going through Mexico, sort of circumventing some of those tariffs. And I wanted to ask you what you thought about that move.
I'm not surprised by it. I mean, it's something that we've talked about on the show in the past, right? Is this concept of border skipping, and if we did see changes in customs and especially de minimis rulings here within I think we'll see it here within the next 6 months, then it's clearly an option for companies to try to get around that. So I'm not surprised by Mexico, especially what was brought up for a reasoning behind this was the amount of changes that Mexico is going through in order to sustain and safely have more goods cross this border between the US and Mexico in particular. And I know there's a lot of systems updates that are coming with that. Of course, there's going to be a need for likely more people at the border to handle that as well, more customs employees, especially even on the Mexico side. They have a huge technology update I know that they're implementing that hasn't gone as smooth, I think, as they've hoped. But again, with all that comes a cost. And so again, I think there's multiple reasons why they're doing this, and big one in particular is to stop that border skipping. And it's interesting because I think we're going to see likely some changes, and I think we're already seeing some changes from Shein and Temu in particular. We've honestly, I've been on Temu, I've been on both sites. I notice this more on probably Temu. A lot of times it's their third party selling things that are already manufactured here in the United States. So you do avoid that situation. I think we'll probably see possibility of some of their manufacturers moving in order to handle some of these changes in customs and pricing as well. But I think probably the most obvious answer of what's to come to this is likely what Temu and Shein are known for is being dirt cheap. So there's a good chance for all those out there who enjoy shopping on those sites that you might not get your next large beanbag chair for $10. It might actually cost something closer to $50 like it actually costs to manufacture. So I think that's what we'll probably see is likely a lot of those costs just being pushed to the end consumer, especially I think with most of these two sites in particular already seeing a huge margin compared to what you normally pay for a lot of those products as well.
Yeah, it seems like the prices almost have to
Yeah.
go up. I mean, it just seems like those companies just take advantage of every possible way, legally, not legally, ethically, not ethically, to
Yeah.
lower the lowest possible cost. So it seems like that would reduce their competitive advantage versus, let's say, H&M or whoever they compete with on some of
Yeah.
those apparel items. So that'll be something that changes in the next year, among other things. One thing that's been a big issue has been the ocean rates also. So want to go into this next topic, which ocean rates seem set to rise, which seems a little bit counterintuitive to me, just because there's a lot of capacity coming into the ocean market and the overall volume of trade around the globe. A little uncertain with all these tariffs that you may actually have a reduction in demand if there really is more nearshoring, reshoring, those type of things. And some good articles there. Recommend that everyone check out the articles that Stuart Churls writes. Really read his stuff religiously. Really does a nice job of keeping us up to date on the ocean market. So he posted an article on December 30th titled "Amid Uncertain Trade Outlook, Higher Asia to U.S. Container Rates, the Only Sure Bet." And it seems like the data is already supporting that. We have a sonar chart that shows those rates in the trans-Pacific routes. So those from China to the U.S. West Coast, which is this white line that we're seeing now, and then also from China to the U.S. East Coast, which is the red line we're seeing now. For a period of time, the spread collapsed. Now the spread is a little bit more normalized, where the longer routing through the Panama Canal, about an extra $1,000 a container. And what's been interesting there is you go back about a year, and about a year at this time was when the Red Sea attacks started happening. So you see this big spike up right at the beginning of 2024, and then it came down to a certain extent, not all the way back down. And then you saw what was a little bit more, was also unexpected, right about April or May, right about the time we had our conference in Atlanta, maybe a little bit before that. There started to be international container shortages. And so the rates spiked again from there. And now they've come down to a certain extent, still higher than what you would normally expect, and then we're seeing an increase there, and some of the things that Stuart brings up in the article, some of the things that Flexport says, in addition to FreightWaves, is that these general rate increases, starting to take place, beginning of the year, and then there's going to be maybe even a little bit more of a push than normal ahead of the Chinese New Year. So demand is higher than it would be normally. Number of reasons for that. The pull forward is uncertainty associated with the with whatever's going to happen on January 15th and the ILA, avoiding tariffs, sort of all these things, and so it's keeping rates, elevated. And then we look at into 2025. I mean, there's a number of areas of uncertainty. We don't know what's going to happen with the Red Sea attacks. Are those going to be diverted to other places, which it seems like maybe they are starting to, and then this extra capacity that's coming into the market, is that going to have an impact? There's new alliances, there's sort of all these things. So do you have any thoughts on the ocean market?
You talked about at the beginning of this episode, like we're going to see a lot of changes, I think, this year. And I think over 2024, we saw a lot of rerouting in particular. And maybe that's adding to a little bit of these rates. Maybe we're not seeing capacity where it normally is. I would think after a year or so now, though, that we'd probably be used to that. I would say, too, one other thing. I was just reading a report the other day about the large amount of containers that are lost now because of the rough seas that a lot of these ships are taking through South Africa, through the Cape of Good Hope. And I think it was like between July and October alone, they saw close to over 200 containers lost just from terrible. There's a current that goes along that area that's really, really tough on ships as well. So
do they just fall off the boat? Is that
yeah, they're just literally falling off the boat. There was one ship, I think, that lost over 100 containers. There was another 2 ships that just completely wrecked as well. And so either they're falling off or the ships themselves are struggling to get through the area. And it's, again, not to say that 100% is the answer to maybe why we're seeing this, but I think the industry is maybe still adjusting to a lot of that rerouting and potentially trying to figure out if these areas are in particular are what we're going to have to get used to going through, or these conditions, right? What does that add to cost? What does that add to our liabilities? That could potentially be a piece of it. But again, just an interesting study. I read more research I read a couple weeks ago. I was like, okay, and we start to see, I think. Oh, I just had Lauren Began, who used to work for the FMC, on the radio show recently, and we're talking about, new lanes up, particularly, and this is something I think we'll see further down the line than this year, but the Arctic being another interesting route that we could see more countries taking, especially China and Russia. But of course, comes with that area comes a need for different capacity, so more icebreakers, which the United States is finally building its first icebreaker after, I think, like over 30 or 40 years. So I just wonder if a little bit of this rerouting that we're seeing is maybe thrown some of these companies in a loop, and maybe that's why we're seeing that potential spike. But again, I think it's there's a lot of uncertainty, so I think right now that could possibly be another part of this too.
Yeah, lots of uncertainty for sure. I mean, these ocean carriers have multiple routing plans in place, like
Yeah.
one if the Red Sea stays closed, another if the Red Sea stays open. I've seen estimates that suggest that routing around the Cape of Good Hope takes something like 8 to 10% of the total capacity just out of the industry. So
Yeah.
if it were to just to be open again, you don't have those concerns, maybe with military escorts, then you could see pressure just on the capacity there, in addition to this additional capacity that's coming into the marketplace. So, I could see a scenario where the ocean rates fall, which would be helpful for shippers, but it's far from a certainty.
Yeah, I think that's it, right? Is that there's just so many different maybe we look in this tech world, algorithms going, right? So many different scenarios going through these systems that we're just not 100% sure on where pricing will go.
Okay, well, let's move on to the next topic. fraudulent returns are a problem. I mean, just returns in general are a problem, but they're a particular problem because they're fraudulent. So why don't you walk us
Yes,
through the fraudulent return
I love
situation?
that. Yeah, so it's funny. So like we talked about earlier, I'm running the Fraud Watch newsletter, so go check that out. Make sure you sign up for that. We also post it too, so if you see the article on FreightWaves, you should be able to within that article put in your email and get that moving forward. And this is something we'll dive into as well in this next newsletter. But yeah, it's a good old, especially a perfect timing for something like this to come out. We just got out of the holidays. I'm sure some of us are maybe trying to sneak in some returns for gifts that we didn't maybe feel as connected to as we always wanted. And it's interesting because with this too, we'll go through some of these numbers. So this is all over 2024, not just the holiday season, but what we saw in 24 in particular. Retailers in particular looks like lost about $103 billion from fraudulent returns and claims. And that accounted for about 15% of total returns, which was over 650 billion, about 680. Now, what's interesting is most of the returns in particular come from online sales. And I think a lot of that is situations, right, where maybe you buy multiple sizes, you're not sure which one will fit, so you buy multiple, send back the rest. I think also sometimes you just don't see the item in front of you, so you get it. Maybe it's a different coloring, maybe it's not 100% what you wanted, so of course you're returning that. So I think what's interesting in that number is how high that is compared to in-store sales, which return about 8% of the time. 24, about 25% for online is a pretty huge jump. Now, about 40% of consumers in this survey also said that they are returning something monthly. So that shows you again how common it is just in the overall shopping experience that we're seeing here in the United States. Now, when it comes to the fraudulent processes or practices in particular, a big one is returning stolen items. So, which what a ballsy crime that is. Not only are you going to just straight up steal the item, but then you're going to return it for cash. Wow, that I'll tell you what, that's taking no risk there for you as a
But
criminal.
don't you
You're
need a
just
receipt for that? Like isn't there has to be
yeah,
some record that you bought that?
that's what so I did see this on TV the other day. I can't remember what news source it was, but sometimes what people do is they apparently will find receipts on the ground, like outside of stores. They'll go into the store, they'll grab all the items that are on the receipt, and then they'll head to the return place and try to return. So,
Mm.
I mean, hey, the economy gets tight. People get really clever. So, I think that's a little bit of sweet talking, maybe. Maybe you can, that card is I threw that card away. I don't have it anymore. Maybe there's some type of talking happening behind the scenes. And maybe just at the end of the day, maybe some of these employees are kind of going around some of these practices as well. So I
Yeah,
thought
you
that
would
one
have to
was
do that.
interesting.
You'd have to do the sweet talking too, because usually it would just be,
Yeah.
oh, great, we'll give you the return back on the card.
Yeah, 100%. No, I trust me. I thought that one was crazy, but then I remembered that this crazy lady on the news that did the whole receipt thing, and it said, "Hey, if that's happening in the world, who knows?" The other one, 60% of them, even more, are instances of wardrobing, which I love this, like these fancy words we're giving these crimes, which is just you bought it, you kept the tag on, you tucked it away, you made sure you went to your New Year's Eve party, you had a blast, you didn't spill anything on it, and you returned it the next day or so forth. So that one, I think that's an old school one. We can see that happening. The other one was 55% was using either counterfeit bills, stolen credit cards, fraudulent gift cards, etc. That clearly probably would also be kind of difficult to do depending on what one of those three you're doing, but not surprised stolen gift cards, things like that, I think happen a lot. Now, as good consumers that we are, I think the sad part about this, Mike, is what our daily lives might turn into, which is returns. I think when we look at this next year, maybe it'll take a few years, but I think really this next year we might start seeing some different changes in return policies, and that might be you having to fork out a shipping cost, or you having to do a little bit extra, or maybe you only get a certain percent back, or things of that nature. Maybe a shorter, smaller period. I know a lot of companies will do 30, 60 days. Maybe we see something more like 15. But I think companies are really going to start holding consumers more accountable for what they are returning, and why they are returning it. And honestly, this is a personal opinion. I like that. I think it's kind of crazy, the return processes that we have in this country in particular. Not so much to say like we, the consumer, are the problem behind it, but a lot of the companies I know are receiving a lot of these goods and either just kind of tossing them away or not handling the management of them well. A lot of times it's easier to just throw these items away depending on their true cost than getting them back into the inventory system. We've already seen a number of retailers change their processes already this year. So I wouldn't be surprised, just because especially the amount of the fraudulent aspect of this, accounting for 15%. I think we'll start to see it, at least, at the very least, I can see us having to pay for the packaging of the return
Mhm.
coming soon. I know Amazon sometimes, depending on the third party seller, might have something like that. If I believe correctly, I think Amazon came out that they were reviewing their return process as well. So I think we'll see some big changes, and for consumers out there, get ready to be a little bit more mindful of how you're purchasing your items. And I think if we do see changes, I think we're also going to see some big changes on those e-commerce numbers. You know, if I know that I'm not going to be able to return a shirt, well, I might not be buying a shirt online moving forward. So something can consider too.
Yeah, it seems like a hard balance to strike because so many retailers, like people just rave about the return policies, like Costco and
Yeah.
Amazon in particular. But yeah, you do have to sort of strike that balance. I can really see AI taking a big part in this, where I think if you had enough data, the AI could probably tell you what is probably a fraudulent return if you know who the consumer is, what the item is, what time of year it's purchased, all those
You know,
things in
it's
the
funny
algorithm.
it's funny you say that, because, and I just want to say this, I'm not fraudulently reporting anything to DoorDash, but I get very picky when I use DoorDash. And if I'm missing a sauce, or if I'm missing something, I will complain about it. It's just how I personally feel. And I've noticed the last couple times I've used it, or if a situation like that happens, there is like a pop up now in my account that's like, you do this a lot. So,
Mm, yeah.
I agree with you. I think they're going to start, maybe certain items that are returned more, they kind of might have like a certain pop-up or a certain price on that return. But I definitely could see that happening, Mike.
And how cheap does an item have to be
Yeah.
for them just to say keep it? Because their item was $10, it's going to cost me 25 to restock it. Like
Great.
what's the threshold? Do you think?
I mean, these days, like, maybe even like somewhere between up to like $10. I mean, right, you like can barely leave the house these days without spending $15 somehow and doing
Mhm.
something. So I could see something like that easily being enacted. But that the only problem with that is like the fraudulent side of it, right? Now, like, are um are people, I guess, well, no, that would work, because I'm in my head, I'm thinking if they're stealing items and can't bring it back, but they already stole to begin with, so I might as well keep it.
Okay, so no one return anything fraudulently.
Yeah,
Make sure
so
all your
thieves.
make sure
Yeah.
you're part of the 85% of returners that are returning things legitimately.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly. All the thieves out there, this isn't the episode for you, right?
yeah. So we'll move on to final topic, which is just a little bit about what's happening in the world of freight, intermodal. So intermodal volume. I mean, this is one that I think the stock analysts really pay attention to. Is the ORAIL DOML have a sonar chart to that effect? And in the fourth quarter, really showed some strength, even after the traditional peak season. You know, the volume tends to peak about October, usually drops off a little bit after that seasonally, but didn't have that at all. We actually rose in December, and year over year in the fourth quarter, I have up 6.5% for loaded domestic intermodal. So that's going to be your 53-foot containers. That's the primary market for JB Hunt, Hub Group, Schneider. So would actually maybe be a little bit positive on those companies. And actually on a 2-year stack is even more impressive, up 13.1%. So would attribute that to record import volumes, more transloading of international containers into domestic containers, which the Port of LA attributed that to just the continued demand for more imports, that the ocean carriers wanted those empty containers back very quickly, those ocean containers back very quickly, because more imports are coming back into the United States. So interesting that the Port of LA says, well, that's a near-term bullish indicator. Also, less time sensitivity of the shipments, since a lot of the shipments are pulled forward to avoid tariffs. And then the rail service, I think, has held up. It's been adequate at least, better than we've seen much of the last few years. There's been some nice investments both by the domestic intermodal companies and containers, and then the railroads themselves and a lot of the terminals. And so it does seem likely to me that rate increases are likely. We rolled out some new intermodal rate data. We have contract rates on a per lane basis for 67 lanes. Also have a couple of indexes, which would encourage Sonar users to look at on a weekly basis when those come out. Expect them to rise. I think the uncertainty is just the magnitude of how much they're going to rise. Is it going to be kind of mid-single digits, which I think is maybe the consensus, or is it going to be something even higher than that after given the past couple of years, the rates have declined. So lots of stuff to check out in intermodal, and lots of articles up on the site. One by Zach Strickland, one by Tony Mulvey, talking about the latest tender rejection rates. Those have come down a little bit seasonally after the spike from in December, but still higher than they were last year. Some indicator that the market's starting to turn and tighten up a little bit.
I like it. I'm interested too. You think with maybe this pull forward from the lunar new year and everything like that, do you think that we'll see continued use of that capacity, kind of holding that inventory maybe early before it gets to its end warehouse here in the US?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a little bit of warehouse in transit.
Yeah.
Just because it's less time sensitive, and intermodal taking an extra day or two with a little bit less certainty of when those goods arrive. I mean, it's just really not a problem anymore. It could actually be thought of as a feature, as strange as that sounds.
For sure. Love it. Interesting stuff. I think that's it for today, right, Mike? We hit all the big notes.
Yep,
I
I
will
think we're out
I
of
will
time.
yeah, we're running right out here for everyone watching. Welcome back. Happy New Year. Happy to start off this wonderful new year with you. Happy 2025. This is just the start of I think a crazy year for what we'll cover on this show. And make sure after this you go sign up for both of our newsletters. Until then, we'll talk with you all next week.